Good evening, everybody. Today we're going to talk about punctuation marks, different forms of punctuation, different signs that we can use in our written communication. Of course, punctuation doesn't come up or show itself when we're speaking, only when we're writing, only when we're communicating in a written form. And that's because the written form tries to emulate or echo or copy or replicate that which we say in spoken English. And that's the case for all languages. So we're going to talk about punctuation. There are 14 or so different punctuation signs in English. And we're going to look at 6 today and the rest next week. Are you ready? Let's begin. I'm going to start with a definition. The marks such as a full stop or comma and brackets used in writing separate sentences are used in writing to separate sentences and their elements and to clarify meaning. So it's designed, these marks, these signs are designed to clarify meaning. We don't have these obstacles when we're speaking. We can raise our voice or lower our voice. We can pause, but we don't have pauses or breaks when we are in writing. We have new chapters, that's a break. We have periods or full stops, that's a break. We have commas. And so we also have different breaks or, sort of pauses in our communication, but they have to be in verbal or sort of written form. The aim of this live is to show the most common uses of the main pronunciation symbols in English. We're going to start with the easiest ones. So wait, they will get more complicated or at least less popular, which makes them less well known. So let's begin. And I'm going to show you the list that we're going to talk about over the next 2 weeks. This week and next week. Today we're going to look at the ones in red, the period, question mark, exclamation point, comma, semicolon, and colon. And then we're going to leave the rest for next week. So the first week, it's more common punctuation signs. The next week, they will be less common or less popularly used, and so you might have questions about them. So let's begin with the first group, before we do that, I want to acknowledge my source. For much of this live, I have utilized this very helpful website, Literacy Ideas, in their punctuation section. Thank you very much for that. All right, that should say sentence. Yeah, sentence endings. That's right. Sentence endings is what we're going to focus on first. Of course, we start with the period or full stop. So why don't we practice that? We say in the US, period, and in the UK, full stop. And so we have two different names for the same dot. We don't call it a dot though. A lot of people would say dot. We have .com, which is sort of a period, but not really, because it doesn't go at the end of a sentence, or in this case, a declarative sentence. So declarative sentences have a subject and a verb and sometimes an object. And I've given 2 such sentences below. So let's take a look. Bill ran home. That's a declarative sentence. We have a subject, Bill, verb ran, and object is home. And so we have the period or full stop at the end. Again, another complete sentence. Until he was 17, Dominic played hockey, full stop. All right. Now, the British use the full stop for another expression. There's an expression, full stop, when you're making a point, an idea, and you say that that's it. There's nothing to discuss. That's the decision, full stop. That means there's nothing more to discuss. So full stop can have a secondary meaning that's very common in the UK, but is not common in the US. So you have to be aware of this. All right, let's move on to question marks. And I apologize. Well, we have, I'm going to give a better slide. I've updated my slides slightly. So let's look at this question mark because it's better. All right, question mark. And you can see the question mark at the end. That is a question mark. And it's a question mark because it marks or signals a question. Indicates a question and is signaled by a reverse order of the sentence. So in declarative sentences, you have a subject and a verb. In questions, you have you have a verb and then the subject. So let's take a look. Did you finish your English homework? Question mark. Now in Spanish, because I've just uploaded today a foreign language exchange, and in Spanish, they have two question marks. One at the beginning, which is reversed, and one at the end. To let people know this is fully a question. Second question, have you studied? So the verb comes before the subject you. Have you studied your English exam? Now, I think for most of us, these first two symbols are not difficult, but now it gets more complicated because I want to talk about the exclamation mark, which is the UK British version, or we in America say the exclamation point, even though it's not a point, it's actually a line and a dot. Well, exclamation mark or exclamation point, they both mean the same thing, and it's this line with a dot. You can see it in these examples, and they're used to indicate strong feelings or emphasis. Strong feelings or emphasis. So let's take a look at both types. He won the gold medal. This is a strong feeling. You're emotionally excited. You're happy. You're thrilled. You're exuberant. And that means that you should appropriately use an exclamation mark. But he did finish his homework. So you're emphasizing people were doubting. Maybe he didn't finish. And you want to emphasize, but he did finish his homework. And that also could merit an exclamation point. And so what I want to say here and what you must sort of understand is that exclamation marks or points are used in very specific situations, and they are not commonly used in English. They are used in these two situations, however, but these two situations aren't always very common. So just be aware that if you don't want to use this too many times, because if you emphasize everything, then nothing is emphasized. If you show strong emotions with everything or towards everything, then you end up showing not much emotion at all, if that makes sense. All right, let's move on to the second category of punctuation, and that's going to be the the comma, the semicolon, and the colon. The comma, the semicolon, and the colon. Let's take a look at these. Now it's becoming a little bit trickier. Let's take a look at, let's take a look at the comma first. This is a little bit complicated. I apologize. The writing should have been a little bit bigger, and for some reason it wasn't. So the comma separates ideas or elements in a sentence. So if you're making a list of 3 or more items, then you use commas. So let's take a look. They traveled through Bulgaria, comma, Slovakia, comma, the Czech Republic, and Poland. Now this is interesting. If I just have 2 items, we don't need a comma. We need a comma with 3 or more items. So if I said they traveled through Bulgaria and Slovakia, that's all. No commas are needed. And is sufficient. Now, I want you to take a look at this second example because we insert a second comma after physics. This is called an Oxford comma. The girl excelled in maths, comma, physics, comma, and chemistry. Now, the reason this is called an Oxford comma is, well, it's not entirely clear because Oxford commas are popular, ironically popular in the US, not in Oxford or in England as much, although they are used in some cases. But the Oxford comma in the first example is after the Czech Republic. So you would have Bulgaria, comma, Slovakia, comma, and then if you wanted to use the Oxford comma, then you put another one after the Czech Republic. Now, why do some people use the Oxford comma, mainly in America, and mainly in Britain they don't? Tradition, habit. In England, they will tell you it's not necessary. We see, because and is telling us it's the last two items in the series. So the Brits would say and is sufficient. Let it do its job. And the Americans might say, well, if we're making a list, we want to separate every item with a comma, whether there's an and there or not, because we might not always use and. So there are two different traditions. Both are correct. Which one you use is up to you, but be consistent. If you want to use the Oxford comma, I generally use the Oxford comma, but when you publish, different publishers have different comma rules, and so this is the biggest change. So that's the Oxford comma, but in general, we separate lists of 3 or more by commas. Now let's do a second comma rule, which some of you, now I apologize, there's a lot here. Let me try to explain it. Commas set off long phrases or subclauses. A subclause or a dependent clause is not a complete sentence. It's dependent on a full or an independent clause. So these are not full sentences. So it's set, commas, set off. Set off means you sort of divide, you move here with a comma, you set aside, you separate the phrase or clause, subclause, or interjection within the sentence. So that's what you're doing. You're separating them. So let's look at the interjection first. This trend, however, was going to be reversed in no time. So, however, is sort of interjected or placed in there, but we don't need it to complete the sentence. We could say this trend was going to be reversed in no time. In no time means quickly. So this trend was going to be reversed, turned around, changed immediately. By adding however, we are just contrasting this idea from an earlier idea. So we've added it for a little bit of extra information, but it's not necessary to complete the sentence. So we use commas. This trend, however, was going to be reversed in no time. Now, here we have long introductions. What's a long introduction? Most publishers or textbooks would say 5 or more words is a long introduction, and you should put a comma. 3 words, you probably don't need a comma. But so prior to moving to China at age 18, comma, that's the introduction. Now we know the main sentence is about to begin. He graduated from high school. So he graduated from high school is the sentence. It's the independent clause. What comes before that is extra information. So when you have a lot of extra information at the beginning of a sentence, we put a comma. Prior to moving to China at 18, He graduated from high school. And here now is where these signs start to act like time. You're meant to pause very shortly, very briefly. And there we have the complete sentence. All right, it's designed, these commas are designed to help the reader, to let them know, okay, that's not the full sentence, it's here. And so that's what these are doing. They're signs, they're marks, they're signposts to help the reader quickly understand the sentence. All right, you do need to wear a darker jacket, if I may say so. So here we have at the end of a sentence this sort of extra if clause. It's not the complete sentence, it's just extra information. So the complete sentence is, you do need to wear a darker jacket. But since we're adding extra information, which takes the form of a clause, an if clause, and a clause contains a verb and a noun, phrases contain nouns in general, if I may say so, is an extra bit of information. It's not essential to the sentence, but it adds a bit of flavor, if I can say that. All right. Number 4. And here's where we have relative clauses. This is information that's not essential for the sentence, but it's optional, but it also helps fill in more detail. The ambulance, I'm going to only read the core sentence, the independent clause. The ambulance took 3 people to the hospital. That's the sentence. Now I'm adding some extra information, which I can easily take out, but I'm adding it, so I put commas. The ambulance, which arrived after just 5 minutes, took 3 people to the hospital. Now, do you hear how I pause a little bit? Listen to how the commas perform when I'm speaking. The ambulance, which arrived after just 5 minutes, took 3 people to the hospital. And so what the commas do is they show the reader, okay, read these together, these words together, and find meaning. Read these words together and find meaning, and read these words together. And so it helps you sort of group words together and quickly understand it. It's sign language. Punctuation is sign language. All right, I hope that's clear. If you have any questions, feel free to ask your question below, and I will answer it at the end of this live. I'm also going to upload it onto my Instagram and my YouTube accounts. They are the same name. I'm sorry, I've just done that one. Let's do the next one, which is the semicolon. Now, the semicolon looks like that at the top with a dot and a comma. Do you see that? They connect, semicolons connect independent clauses. In other words, so go straight down to the bottom, a semicolon functions like a period or full stop. It has a very similar function. Now, what's the difference? The difference is the following. If you have a period, it separates 2 independent sentences or clauses. When you have a semicolon, it tells the reader that the first sentence and the second sentence are very closely related. So don't pause very long. Go quickly and read them almost together. Read them almost together, but we don't want them completely together, or we'll have a lot of words and it will be difficult to understand. So the teens finish school early. They then began to practice. They then began to practice soccer. I'm sorry. They then began soccer practice. I'm very sorry about that. They then began soccer practice. So 2 should be began. They then began soccer practice. So let's read it one more time. The teens finished school early. They then began soccer practice. In other words, these 2 concepts are very closely linked in idea. And so we don't want to hesitate or pause for very long. Now let's go to the colon, which is the final sign for today, and then we're going to take your questions. The colon, which are these two dots, introduces a quotation or a series and separates two independent clauses when the second one explains the first. Now let me explain all of that one by one. So if I want to use a quotation, we're going to look at quotation marks next week. He turned to her and said, colon, and then there's a quote, I can't go. And so introducing a quote, we can use a colon. He turned to her and said, colon, I can't go. So that's one common way to use it. You will see this a lot in fiction. If you read a lot of fiction, you'll see a quote, you'll see the colon before a quote. Number 2, when you want to list items, there were 3 contestants in the games, 2 men and 1 woman. So I have the quote, the colon after games, and then I go into more detail about the 3 contestants, but I'm listing it. There were 3 contestants in the games, 2 women and 1 man. So I'm listing the 3 contestants. Now, closely related is when you have one sentence that goes into more detail. We have a great word that elaborates upon the first sentence. So if the second sentence elaborates upon or provides more detail, if it provides more detail, then you can use a colon between these. And it's beautiful because it tells the reader, wait, this sentence is going to give more information about the first one. So wait, don't ask your questions yet. I'm going to answer it. I thought the test was too long. Colon. When I see a colon, I know that he's going to talk about what too long means. I only finished half of it. That's a long test. If you only finish 50%, that is a long test. So a colon in this case signifies more detail in the second sentence. I thought the test was too long, colon. I only finished half of it. All right. This was, I hope, informative, albeit is a synonym for but, albeit, A-L-B-E-I-T, albeit short. This live was informative, albeit short, I hope. So let's see when we get to your questions. For those of you who came a little bit late, I'm going to put this